Looks like we're good. So what's going on, guys? It is a very sick but also very excited Illuminostic. Tomorrow we are going to drink Noya Rao, the Tree of Light, with ayahuasca. Noya Rao is a very rare tree. I don't actually know the Latin name. I didn't think to look it up. But it's said that there's only 4 or 5 of them left in the entire Amazon. And for the Shipibo, who are pretty much unanimously accepted to be the number one tribe in terms of knowledge of the plants of the rainforest, it is the pinnacle of master teachers. So we are extremely excited, especially considering that the shaman that we're going to drink with is the son of Wana Mahua. The Mahua are the, I guess, the top of the hierarchy, the most respected and renowned lineage of Shipibo shamans or shamanic families. What else was there to say about this? And they are the originators of the Noya Rao diet. So, huge honor, something I've been waiting years to experience, and especially in this context with the original lineage. And you guys know that my life kind of revolves around, my spiritual life revolves around this light mystery. And this is the Tree of Enlightenment. It's also called the Camino de la Verdad, the Path of Truth. And it is, the legend has it that people will sometimes attain to Buddha level enlightenment spontaneously after drinking this tree. It has bioluminescent leaves. Lucky enough to have seen one once on ayahuasca. I went out to the jungle, middle of the night, to use the bathroom, and there were bioluminescent leaves all over the ground and this giant, magnificent Noya Rao in front of me. So, I will report back about that experience in a few days. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the intelligence of ayahuasca and the possibility that it's something actually much bigger than ayahuasca at work. You know, in my opinion and experience, there is no doubt that ayahuasca gives one the ability to access information through non-ordinary means. DMT entities and Pachamama, the ayahuasca spirit, in which actually it's probably worth noting that my experience is that there is a female narrator that seems to be like Queen of the Dominion or something, and then there's a whole other cast of characters. So it's not always this Pachamama narrator. Sometimes it's one of her associates that will deliver this information. But I have been told, you know, that my partner would have my baby before we were ever involved, didn't even know her. Our son is now asleep in the room next door. I've been told that I would receive a specific amount of money from a specific person minutes before my phone beeped. This was DMT. A mantis told me this, said her name, the amount of money. I had not sent distress signals. I had not asked her for money. She'd never sent money before. Totally random, and on and on. I've also experienced telepathy over and over and over again with enough specificity. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And also insights into healing that no one could possibly have known. And given information myself as a facilitator that I did not know. For example, I had a client who actually came back and just left yesterday or last night, who didn't have visions. He would have communication with the medicine and experiences, but no bright, colorful visions. And the last night, I drank medicine with him, and the Pachamama narrator said, "Go and cut a piece of Ortiga Roja and come and give him a cleansing with it. It's a stinging plant." So agua florida on his back and stinging with this nettle. And he had drank the medicine, I think, 5 hours earlier. And somehow the visions opened up, and the advice that this plant gave me turned out to be actually true. So, there are countless examples that I can give of this medicine providing information that is accurate, that no one could possibly know, insights into how to heal different medical issues. One of those stories I'm going to share in a minute. Just tons of it. And then on top of that, it's not like it's just me. All the way back to Sir Walter Raleigh in the 1700s, he wrote in his diary that a shaman had told him that he could know anything when he drank the medicine. And so he said, tell me something you couldn't know. The medicine said your sister is dead, and it turned out to be true. 3 days earlier, she had died. And, anthropologists have records of these shamans being able to describe street corners in China and the Eiffel Tower and the pyramids, and they definitely had never seen a TV and never left the jungle. So the evidence that this medicine gives access to this type of information, all different types of information, is pretty overwhelming. But I try to approach all this stuff with a sort of scientific attitude, and I wonder still to this day, is it that the medicine puts us into communication with our subconscious or even with the body in a way that we don't normally have access to? Is it that it brings down filters in the mind that allow us to connect with a greater consciousness that has this reservoir of information in it? It could be any of those things. So I'll share a few anecdotes and give my 2 cents. So do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron where you can access 5 years of premium content. And we're demonetized, so we really appreciate it. The first example I'm going to give is sort of supporting the idea that it's something bigger, basically like God, that is orchestrating these coincidences or teachings. The most recent example I can give is that I had a client who was not having visions, and the ayahuasca was bringing up all this anger. And so after a couple of nights of this, it resulted in a conversation between the two of us where I was able to confer advice and insight that had the medicine worked and put on a bunch of fireworks and, that had been the focus of it, this conversation may not have happened. And so, and this is not the only time I've seen this, but the medicine will not give visions if there is something that needs to be addressed first. And many people report this, that, like for myself, the first time I drank, it was mostly just physical, no visions or anything. So this is kind of a common experience that if there's some sort of blockage, there's something, and it really could also be to ensure that you don't have a difficult time, too difficult of a time, because it wants to make sure that it has resolved these major issues, traumas, before it puts you in hyperspace, because that could lead to a very difficult experience. And so beyond that, though, beyond the conversation being catalyzed by this lack of visions, there was another client there that actually mentioned earlier in the stream, who after 1 month with me, he only had visions the last night, and they were not particularly bright. They were there, but they didn't have the incredible glowing lucidity. Ayahuasca might be satanic. I'll address that in just a second, because I've had thoughts like that myself, and there's one key piece of information that, first of all, I don't think there's any such thing as Satan, but some dark force. I'll get to that in a second. So this other guest, right? He had spent a month and only had vague visions at the end, and it definitely wasn't the medicine, because everyone else had the type of visions you would expect. And so he continued working with the medicine on his own back in his home country for 1.5 years, I think, and still he never had these incredible visions. So after a couple of nights with the other client, who was getting very frustrated because nothing was really happening and the visions weren't coming, I was trying to tell him, if you persist, eventually that door will open. And so the other client, finally, then the same night that this other guy got really frustrated, had finally those bright, luminous, incredible visions, as if to say to the other guy, if you persevere, this will happen. Look at me; it's taken 2 years, right? So those kind of circumstances to me seem like the universal mind is deeply integrated, and it is orchestrating all of these events, and I don't necessarily think you even have to frame it like it's God intervening and manipulating things consciously. I think that it could be just that there are different orders of symmetry that interpenetrate all systems, and so these things are happening just because of a sort of underlying framework in the wiring under the board. Either way you slice it, though, it becomes obvious that even if it's true that it is some grand architect beyond ayahuasca that is giving the impression that these things are being guided, ayahuasca and other psychedelics definitely increase the instance of these sort of things, So that's one pretty good example of the kind of evidence, I guess, I observe that it's something even greater than ayahuasca. As I was saying in the beginning of the stream, the jury is still out for me as to whether or not these are spirits with objective existence of their own, or if it's just, as Aldous Huxley suggested, I think 100 years ago, that psychedelics, we have a reducing valve in our nervous system, and there's a filter that screens out the extraneous stuff, the pulsating energetic patterns that if we could see, it would be difficult to drive a car or shoot a deer, or the telepathy is filtered out because if we constantly had other people's thoughts entering into our head, it would be very confusing and overwhelming. So that possibility is quite strong in my mind. All right, so let's talk about healing insights from these plants. Right, traditionally, one of the things that ayahuasca was used for, the shaman would drink it and say someone had been bitten by a particular snake, a Dos Equis, for example. They drink, they go out in the jungle and look around, and the snake that treats that particular, or the plant that treats that particular snake venom will turn into the head of that snake, so he knows this is the one to use, right? So one possible explanation for this phenomena is biophotons. All living tissue, plant or animal, emits biophotons at the rate of 100 per square centimeter per second. And experiments have been done, and they have determined that it is in fact true that cells, even from different species, can receive information that's emitted in this way. So one suspicion that I have is that ayahuasca gives us the ability to give visual form to the information that is being received by the DNA. And that's the actual mechanism behind this. So an example that I can give from my own experience along these lines, I was out in the jungle. I think it was only the third or fourth time that I had had ayahuasca. And I was complaining that all of the visions I had were chaotic. They didn't make any sense, And in this particular case, it was a vision of a sort of trolley car, like a Japanese ultra-modern artist. It wasn't even moving. It was like a still. And I was like, what is with all this nonsense? It doesn't do anything for me. And so the medicine says to me, okay, I'll give you something I can use. And suddenly there's this beautiful sort of alien geisha-looking woman, and she makes this gesture from her heart, and these green characters float out that kind of looked like Japanese writing, but much more otherworldly or something. I don't really know how to put it exactly. But, I was like, that's really great and all, but what am I going to do with that? And she said, you will make music with them. And I was like, still, that doesn't help much. So in response to that, there's this giant, almost armored, like he had black armor, kind of walked out, and he starts doing this dance. And every time he would put a little extra jig in it, the locusts in the jungle would lose their minds, like a cheering crowd. And so, again, I'm like, that's cool and all, but what is this locust god? This is a neat trick. And she said, okay, here's something you can definitely use. And suddenly I could see into my gut, and there was a swarm of like millions of these like yellow bugs, just all, obviously up to no good. And I was like, parasites? And she said, yeah, it's so bad it could actually kill you. Remember when you got lost in California And it's true that a year before, or less maybe, I had been out picking black trumpet mushrooms in the coastal hills of California, and I went around to the backside of the bushes without noticing, and I went down the wrong side of the hill, and I was lost out there for 3 nights and 4 days, and it turned out to be really dumb because the highway was just right. But I was drinking out of, leaves that I found on the ground, and at one point a stream, I figured it was running really fast, so no problem. But apparently that wasn't true. And she said, I can flush them out, but I cannot kill the eggs. You have to go into the jungle and get this plant and eat it, and then it will kill them. And my response was, I am not going to listen to some voice in my head on ayahuasca at 2 a.m. and go out into the rainforest and just eat some plant. In hindsight, I should have gone and got the plant and then looked it up online to try to see if it was toxic or not, and then consumed it as instructed, right? So I didn't do that, but a few days later, I went to a ceremony with my teacher who was working in the Shuar way, and for the Shuar, the purging is the most important thing. The visions are very secondary. Vomiting. In fact, the men, every day when they wake up, they drink coconut bowls full of guayusa until they vomit every single day to clean themselves. And so this teacher was all about the vomiting. And the second time he's done this to me, in fact, the first time he did it because when the talking stick goes around and we share our experiences, I said, I just asked her not to make me vomit because I hate vomiting. And he just looked at me like, and the next day when I got there, there's this huge tub of guayusa and a coconut bowl in it, and he asked me to vomit, to drink it and vomit and drink more and vomit again and do it with joy. And it's true that after 6 times or so vomiting this guayusa, it became really pleasant. I could feel that it was a purge and that it was cleaning me. And the stars looked more beautiful after 3 or 4 purges than they ever had looked before. And so again, after this trip to the jungle, when we get back, he has the guayusa bowls and he's telling us to drink it until we vomit. And so I'm drinking it, and it's going right through me almost instantly. And I'm like frustrated because I'm thinking, well, I need to vomit. I'm drinking it to the toilet all night long. And then I heard her voice in my head say, I can flush the parasites, but I cannot kill the eggs. And I realized that this medicine had basically control over my body and was trying to clean these parasites out. And so, this, and I actually ended up killing them with tobacco, in case anyone's wondering, which is a rough way to go. But if you can do it safely, drinking tobacco can be incredibly healing. Actually fixed an anger issue that had plagued me for decades by drinking tobacco, and also a tobacco enema, which was terrible, but it worked. So where were we at with this glorious tale? Purging. Oh, by the way, this is also an AMA, so if anyone has any questions, I am totally open to answering them. Okay, let's just go on to this ayahuasca might be satanic statement in the chat there. I have had, I've been leery, I guess, of these DMT entities and plant spirits, and I think anyone should be, because the reality is we don't really know what we're dealing with. No one does. If you look at the fact that all of the different ayahuasca drinking tribes have different names for different spirits, and there's no consensus about what it is. In fact, many shaman will tell you that they're not really sure what they're dealing with, indigenous shaman. So, it's a fair question. But the answer that I have that I think really clears the table of possibilities is that in all the years that I have smoked DMT or drank ayahuasca and also performed ritual magic in various contexts, never once has a DMT entity or an ayahuasca spirit lied to me about anything, and I have never once been told to do anything harmful to myself or to anyone else. So I think if you are what you do, the fact that, I've never even heard of anyone getting a imperative, from the medicine to go and hurt someone or to hurt themselves. I'm sure it's maybe happened somewhere down the line, but it has never happened to me. Every single bit of information that I have gotten from these spirits has been true and also beneficial. The only example that I can give where I was lied to, I was told why. I was told that the spirit was lying before the end of the night, and why. And so I had left my partner and my son at a vegan community nearby, and I had gone to drink. And there were a couple of guys there that we were kind of a little, uncertain of. There was no real evidence that they were dangerous, but definitely, and once I drank the medicine, I started thinking about it. I was like, was it wrong of me to go here and leave them there? And, there were tons of people around, and it was probably completely irrational to be worried about it. But suddenly, the Nagwal is dead. Like, my son's name is Nagwal. So Nagwal is dead in big black letters with gold kind of glowing around it. And I was absolutely terrified. But I realized that there was a tube that was about 20 feet long. And at the end of that tube was a golden bag, like an IV bag. And all of my fear and horror was in that bag. And it's difficult to describe this, but I could feel the sensations, not in my body, but over where that bag was. And the lesson was how detached I was from my emotions. This was the medicine's way of communicating that. And as soon as I realized what was being communicated, she said, I'm sorry I had to put you through that, but I needed to make a point. There was another occasion similar. Hopefully I can recall the exact details of this, but the other time that I was lied to, I was on the toilet, and the medicine told me my partner had done something, and that she didn't really love me, and all of this stuff. And so there was some kind of dialogue that ensued, and once the point had been made, this robot, kind of like the Jetsons robot, came rolling over, and it had a tray of presents. And I was so furious that I refused to open the presents and take them. And I apologize, that story is kind of pointless, because I know there was something in the middle there that framed it all and what the lesson was. It had something to do with not trusting women because of my mother. But yeah, aside from those two occasions, and in both occasions, I was told that these things weren't true. So I really have a hard time accepting that ayahuasca is evil and that it's all a trick. Many people cite the fact that it doesn't always help people, that sometimes it does the opposite. It causes ego inflation, sometimes to insane degrees. But I would argue that ego inflation, no one and nothing can perform an action or be something that isn't inherently part of it, right? So when people experience this ego inflation, the almost inevitable consequence of it is that eventually they're humbled. So even in the case where somebody goes on a crazy ego inflation and destroys their life or whatever, I would argue that the lesson that they're being taught is humility. The video quality is not good? Well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would the video quality? Is anyone else having that problem? What tobacco leaves did you use? Anytime I talk about tobacco, I'm always talking about Mapacho tobacco, which is Nicotiana rustica. It is roughly 16 times as high in nicotine as the commercial tobaccos. And it also contains harmalas, which are the same compounds that are in the ayahuasca vine. And, in our culture, we kind of view tobacco as this like addiction causing, unhealthy, dangerous sort of thing. And it can be dangerous, for sure. But in the jungle, at least amongst the Quechua, where I lived in Ecuador for 5 years. It's the most important medicine in the jungle, arguably. And it is a tremendous ally if it's used correctly. So, yeah. I had just recalled another example of something higher even than ayahuasca sort of contributing to these lessons, and hopefully I can recall. Like I mentioned earlier, guys, I'm really sick, so I'm not firing on all cylinders, unfortunately. Again, if you guys have AMA questions, I am all ears. Do I prefer freebase NNDMT? No, I definitely do not. NNDMT is useful and interesting because it is much easier to catapult yourself into the realm where these DMT entities seem to exist. There are layers to the DMT experience and the ayahuasca experience. There is sort of a waiting room, people call it, where there's just orange and red pulsating blobs. And then a little bit further than that, there are the jesters. And a little bit beyond that is where it really opens up into this realm of entities and that sort of level of weirdness. So I would recommend to anyone to have that experience because it's definitely different. But at the same time, being catapulted into hyperspace and interacting with these beings, and then you're just back in 5 minutes. It can be difficult to retain any useful information. Sometimes it's just you're too awestruck to process it. So with ayahuasca or even changa, it turns it into a navigable space where there's also the narrator, the Pachamama presence, that is less likely to that's not there with freebase ayahuasca. So when people drink the medicine and don't see visions, you've noticed they have to overcome something to see them. What has been on average the common obstacle? There doesn't really seem to be a common obstacle. When that happens, it's usually because there's some sort of block. It can even be because gingers supposedly have a different type of metabolic salt that isn't destroyed by the MAOIs and the harmalas. So they have a harder time to have those visions. But the impediment usually is some sort of trauma or anger issue or something that could potentially cause a problem if people were to go too far into the medicine space without having resolved it first. That's another bit of evidence that this ayahuasca is not only intelligent but benevolent, because it does seem to protect people oftentimes, and to stage the experience so that they're not given more than they can handle. Somebody's asking about Dionysus. No, I don't have any. Can you please DM me the best mix for ayahuasca? So, let's see here. I'm trying to recall another instance. I thought about all this before I hopped on, but like I said, I've been very, very sick, so I'm kind of dumb at the moment. God, I had come up with a really great one. Well, let's talk also about how the ayahuasca seems to confer a different level of intelligence and receptivity and intuitive capacity to people that drink it often. This is a really extraordinary thing that happens, with anyone that drinks it often, in my experience. I've told you guys, excuse me, I gotta blow my nose. I've told most of you guys, if you're a regular viewer, the story many times before, but maybe this is framing it in a new light and also offering an element that I may not have always shared. And that is this. The person that I ended up learning from for years, even if you didn't drink ayahuasca yet, he still would know what you were thinking all the time. On the first occasion, I was sitting by him on the bus on the way to the jungle. Hey now. And I had just met my partner, but I didn't even know her name. I just thought of her as the German girl. So I'm sitting there on the bus, and I think it was the day before, maybe 2 days before, I had gone into a coffee shop, and I saw my partner for the first time. And this was the day after an ayahuasca experience. And this intuition definitely sticks with you for days or weeks afterwards, especially if you maintain a clean diet afterwards and consciously work to maintain your receptivity. And so I saw her, and the medicine said she will have your babies. And I was like, yeah, right. That does not make any sense. And I blew it off. But then I'm on the bus. The shaman sits next to me, and I'm thinking about this voice saying she will have your babies. And the second I had that thought, he looked at me and he goes, the first time I saw my partner, I thought she will have my babies. And so that was, that was uncanny. You know, there's no reason. Like, why would he just say that all of a sudden? You know, there's nothing had been said about this at all. So then we go out to the jungle, and I'm sitting on the deck with my eyes closed. I didn't even know he was there. I open my eyes and look over. Oh, well, first, I had been thinking the German girl. I should invite her to tea. And I open my eyes and look beside me, and the shaman's sitting there, and he goes, the German girl, invite her to tea, but by the river. And, you know, and then another occasion, I think the next night, I was seeing through my forehead. The pineal gland had been activated, and it does indeed have rods and cones, and is connected to the neovisual cortex. So I'm seeing through my forehead, and I go downstairs the next morning, and he says, sometimes you can see through your forehead when you drink the medicine. First thing out of his mouth. So, you know, actually, that same day, and this is another one of those indications that there's something universal that is having input in these situations. We had gone to the waterfall because they're very sacred to the Shuar. One of my teachers, if you talk to him, he's Shuar. It's just cascadas. That's all somehow the conversation drifts to waterfalls constantly. You know, it's such a massive focal point for them. So we had gone to this waterfall to invite these waterfall spirits to come to the ceremony that night, and it did appear that happened, which was remarkable, but also a tale for another time. And he gave out mapacho cigars to everybody but me. And I thought, what the hell, you know, why did he skip me? And I honestly thought it was some sort of favoritism because I was the only person that wasn't Czech, and he was Czech. So, so we get back to the compound. It wasn't really a retreat center. It's just kind of a house with no walls. You know, just a very simple structure out in the jungle. And my mom had just committed suicide, and the last time that I interacted with her, it went really, really badly. Terrible fight. So I have this experience where my mom descends out of the stars, and she's got blue flames in her eyes, and all of the spirit beings turn to demons, and, you know, really rough. And I went out to the jungle to kind of collect myself, and I turn around, and there's a mapacho cigar right in front of my face when I really needed it later. It's as if he knew something when we were at the waterfall, and something told him, give this to him later, he's going to need it. So that wasn't actually the main point of this story, though. Before my mom committed suicide, I had been with this shaman drinking, and he told me, when you get home, go directly to the yurt. Do not interact with your mother, and go to the yurt and burn some incense, and say all the things that you need to say to her to the smoke. So I got home, and it wasn't late enough. somehow my mother and my stepfather had taken LSD, and so they were awake and wanting to interact. We're tripping, and you just got back from the jungle drinking ayahuasca, and so it had stirred up all this stuff from my childhood. My mother was very abusive and deeply mentally ill, and it had done a tremendous amount of damage, and I was just freshly aware of all that, really, for the first time in my life, like really, clear understanding. And so one thing led to another, and we ended up having this terrible argument, and I left the next day, and then she committed suicide. So the fact that this shaman apparently anticipated that I needed to avoid my mom when I got home, and that all the things he told me to say to the smoke, I ended up saying to her instead. It's extremely difficult to write off this sort of phenomena, especially after so many instances experiencing this kind of thing. And as a side note, a lot of people criticize psychedelics, saying that the knowledge that you receive, the insights and the information are not retained. If that's true, it's the fault of the individual. And I would point to mountains and mountains of evidence from Princeton and Johns Hopkins University, mostly regarding psilocybin, that they checked in with their clinical subjects 5 years after their psilocybin experience, and they had, to a very large degree, retained the memory improvements that were measured afterwards, the psychological and emotional improvements. All of it had been largely retained 5 years later. And then as far as ayahuasca goes, this interaction with this intelligence that opens up your intuition and activates the pineal gland so that you're able to receive precognitions and connect with people's subconscious and receive information in this way, that is retained. Many of these stories that I offered, this was not during ayahuasca that the shaman was reading my mind. It is just that once you have deactivated those filters, to some extent they remain down, and you do remain receptive to these things. In fact, what a lot of people call a hyper-persistent perceptual disorder, in my opinion, is probably largely actually the fact that people, especially those that take psychedelics recreationally, are not actually expecting the parameters of what's available to them to experience to change. They're not expecting their consciousness to actually evolve. And then when that happens, they think they've broke their brain and gone insane. I actually dealt with that to a surprising degree, considering how open-minded I am. It was very difficult to accept a lot of these experiences. And it's sort of an ontological shock, even for someone like myself. So I can understand how people coming from an even more normal place, might misunderstand the changes that have occurred in their being. So just a warning for you guys out there, when you change your consciousness, you are able to perceive more subtle symmetries, really, I think is the best word for it. And you're probably not losing your mind. It's possible that you're having a psychotic break, but in most cases, it's just that you have actually expanded your consciousness. Let me see. Looks like we have some questions. Right on, Jonathan. Can you talk about how to use ayahuasca to heal trauma? Do you need to combine meditation techniques with the medicine? Yeah, that's a really important question. We talk a lot about integration in the plant medicine world, but I think the focus being on integration rather than preparation has to do with profit motive. People don't want to tell their clients, learn self-psychoanalysis, learn the basics of, just skim. It doesn't have to be a deep scholarly project, but at least have some basic understanding of how these things work. And certainly meditation techniques, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, I think, is an incredible ritual magic tool, even for someone that doesn't believe in magic. It's just an incredible tool for organizing your being every day and allowing your truest and highest expression of yourself to coagulate in your being and have a meaningful existence. So, that is all tremendously important. And I think the fact that so many people are so invested in this idea that the medicine itself is intelligent and has its own existence. Sometimes people leave too much up to the medicine. For me and my clients, I stay in contact with everyone indefinitely after. I mean, probably 85% of the people that have ever come to a retreat, I'm still in contact with. I have studied, psychology and psychotherapy and all sorts of different mystical traditions, and I employ that all in my interactions with people so that I can give them the most support. They're thoroughly prepared. So yeah, that's a huge thing, that if someone really is interested in being a healer with these medicines, they need a broader toolkit than just understanding even traditional shamanism. It is definitely true that shamans can oftentimes, fix things in people that there are no words exchanged. One technique that I know has an effect. When you drink ayahuasca, you can see a sort of net of energy around people. It's not an aura. It's much more sophisticated looking. And there will be places in the fabric of it that are black or broken. And you make sounds. I was taught to make two different pitches at once. They're out of phase, which causes tension, and then you bring them together so that they are harmonious, and you can use that to mend this fabric. There are lots of different versions of this. Oftentimes a plant can be enough. If I notice that someone has a closed off heart, you give them Bobinsana. And that oftentimes will help, but it's only really going to open the doorway. You have to make conscious this understanding, this knowledge. And you also have to have a protocol for mindfulness and for re-engineering your being. You have to learn to recognize habits that are the product of trauma or other types of psychological aberrations. You have to look for manifestations of your self-esteem issues. And then you have to have a protocol for recognizing them in the moment and adopting the behavior. And eventually, over time, what will happen is that these programs are rewritten. And the neuroplasticity and neurogenesis that you get from psychedelics helps in this process because it makes the brain more malleable. You're actually... the dendritic spines that have withered from addiction or depression will actually strengthen and come back to life with psilocybin, something that science thought was impossible until they observed it from psilocybin. So, I hope that answers your question, that, there really is a tremendous amount of responsibility on the individual that opens up these doorways to take control and consciously learn to construct and manage their being. In fact, if you take ayahuasca or some other psychedelic and all of this stuff is revealed to you, and then you don't do anything to change it, you're just going to feel like a bigger, failure. So it's kind of like the analogy I use all the time, that if you crash on a bicycle, you're only going to get hurt a little bit. But if you get in a Lamborghini and drive it into a brick wall at 220 miles per hour, you're going to die. So when you take a more powerful catalyst and a fast track to something, that's not cheating, but you have to take responsibility for the fact that it comes with greater responsibility and the potential to derail and do damage is higher. Okay. Any other, let's see, you can treat anything even with mushrooms. It's the setting of your environment. Yeah, so it's pretty late, and I have this engagement tomorrow, so I'll give you guys a few minutes to come up with questions, and I will try to recall the other examples I was going to give that suggest this kind of intelligence. Just a moment while I meditate on that. It was something really good, and it has escaped me. Someone must have a question. Well, I'm drawing a blank on this last bit of information. I'll give you guys a few minutes to ask a question or two. And otherwise, we are still booking for November 15th through December 15th in the Sacred Valley. We're going to incorporate, is an empty mind a form of trance? That's a good one. What am I eating? What am I eating? It's coca paste. Oh my God, you guys managed to derail me again. I had an idea. All right, I'll just answer that question. Is an empty mind a form of trance? It certainly can be. It certainly can be. One of the most fundamentally important aspects of navigating psychedelic space, navigating life, is to have the ability to conjure up a specific state of mind at will. And in the Western occult, read my mind, what am I eating? That might be a tall order. But, there are different levels of this. Fear is a dissonance pattern that inhibits the reception of creative energy and blocks all sorts of possibilities and potentials. And so, that is an energy that must be controlled. The empty mind trance question, though, I'm honestly not really sure to answer that, I guess, because I don't know what you mean by empty mind. For 100% certainty, if you practice meditation long enough, you can enter into altered states of consciousness just by meditating and emptying the mind. I guess what's kind of gnawing at me is I have a sort of pet peeve or opinion, I guess, might be more fair. Oreos. People tend to only use the emptying, the stillness meditation, and that is tremendously important. But I think also sitting in stillness, but then learning to really concentrate and focus the mind. For example, an exercise that I think is really powerful. In the morning, you do this focus meditation where you can pick a tatwa or something, a simple symbol, and visualize it. And if it flickers, anything changes color, you start over. And you do this practice for a long time, and you will notice that the mind will do anything it can to escape your control. And on the converse side of that, if you pick certain symbols that have meaning to you, you can enter into a trance state that is based upon the allegories and the meaning in the symbol. And so, I feel like that kind of meditation is maybe even more important than the empty mind. I know that wasn't the best answer. So to face your fear is to control your creative energy. Yeah, I'll talk about that for just a second. I just did a stream a little while back called Mastering Fear, I think, if you want to look that up. But no ayahuasca, no psychedelics of any kind were involved. But every night at midnight, and this was in the middle of a period where there was a lot of synchronicity and just general mind expansion, not catalyzed by any kind of substance. And I was compelled to go out in the middle of the night and face a different fear. And one of them in particular, I almost stepped on a rattlesnake. And as my energy stilled, the snake rattle perfectly synchronized and stilled. And my dog had been trying to attack the snake. And as soon as I stilled that energy, the dog stopped. And so, like I said, I just streamed about this. I don't want to go through it all again and bore my regulars. But through this succession of 7 nights, it was shown to me through the most remarkable, marvelous, even miraculous circumstances that if you absolutely have no fear, nothing can harm you. And I tested this to an extent that, might even be foolish, but it was proven to be true in every case. So this is something that I really strongly promote, that, part of any spiritual practice should be a direct confrontation of fear. In fact, in shamanic traditions and in the Eleusinian mysteries, part of the initiation was to be put through all of these terrifying ordeals in order to force you to come to the point where you can control those fears. And from a shamanic point of view, or even a New Agey point of view, if it's true that as you expand your consciousness, your ability to influence reality also expands, you have to make sure that you have the right energetic state. Otherwise, rich too soon, wise too late, you will just cause all sorts of chaos and destruction. So, if you're embarking on this path, then yeah, that's something you really need to work on, is the ability to just command your internal environment. You don't want to see yourself as the victim of a confluence of forces. You want to be a force yourself. What's going on, Australia, Michael? Okay, do we have any more? Any more questions? Man, I'm really annoyed that I can't recall this other example that I was going to offer of the universal mind in conjunction with ayahuasca. I think it had something to do with body intelligence. But anyways, to summarize all this, I'm interested in whether or not these spirits are objectively real from, I guess, an academic standpoint, and in the end, it kind of doesn't matter, because what is absolutely certain is that ayahuasca has the ability to confer information that you could not possibly know. Precognitions are real. And it does take developing a kind of skill set. You have to learn, for example, to maintain complete clarity and focus even at higher doses, which for some, hey Anna, how's it going? For some people it takes a lot of work, for others not so much, but it is definitely possible. The insight about my parasites that I had, may have saved my life, and it was definitely true and definitely real. The shaman warning me not to interact with my mother when I got home was valid. The bottom line is that at the end of the day, over and over and over and over again, I have seen this medicine show people that or things that they could have known, right? But the way I always open ceremony is that I ask the medicine to shine the light where we have been unwilling or unable to look, and to give us the wisdom and the discipline to take what we find there and walk with that knowledge wisely, right? So time and time again, I have seen it show people things that they had not been able to articulate, or they had not been able to confront, and it's almost always done in a way that is gentle enough that the difficulty is minimized. In fact, in all these years, I've only seen a couple of really bad ayahuasca freakouts, and in most cases, they're resolved with the flick of a wrist, some agua florida, and a little bit of intention from the point of the shaman. People screaming bloody murder, and just limpieza, agua florida, and then stopping the screaming, and then you have to get them out of the malocos or head over their bucket because they're going to vomit immediately after. There are people in this chat that can tell you for sure the ability of this medicine to direct your attention to things that you would never have looked at. So the bottom line is that is real. And for me, that's really all that is essential to know. Whether or not Pachamama is an actual spirit with her own objective existence is almost irrelevant, because whatever it is, you can gain insights, you can even be shown a path forward in your life that you could not possibly have seen. On one occasion I was needing a property immediately. I had no money, but I had to move right away, and it had to be a place that was like a retreat center with a maloka and all of these conditions and circumstances, enough lodging for everyone. And the next day I was sort of guided to go into this store, and the only person I talked to the next day had exactly the property we needed and was willing to let us move in and just pay him a commission, So will it do it all for you on its own? No. But I am not aware of any other tool that has the efficacy and the power and even just the otherworldliness of the experience. If you're the kind of person that needs proof, that wants certainty and not faith, which I think is, everyone should think that way. The best way that I have found to show someone undeniably that there is more to reality, at the very least, some sort of integrated intelligence that's inextricably intertwined into the fabric of the cosmos and that runs through us. And so with just a little bit of expanded awareness, you can align yourself with this and accelerate your path and find strength and empowerment and clarity and resolve unresolvable issues. Treatment resistant conditions are often just plowed over by ketamine and synthetic psychedelics. What's the most amazing thing I have experienced on ayahuasca? Man, that's a difficult... Seeing through my forehead when the pineal gland was activated, and then having the shaman the next morning, the first thing out of his mouth, sometimes you can see through your forehead when you drink the medicine. That was up there. Another time, this might have been actually the same night. I think it was the same night, or the night before. I had been fasting for 2 days, and so I had nothing in my stomach. And we had gone through this rigorous ordeal of hiking through muddy jungle in mountains. It was steep and muddy. And so, anything that had been in my body was used up. We were actually drinking minimal water as well. And so at one point, the medicine tells me you need to go out into the jungle. And I did not want to go out into the jungle. So I started to feel sick, and I knew she's trying to force me to, because I couldn't vomit where I was. And then I had to, what felt like it was going to be explosive diarrhea. So, but I couldn't go, I was plugged up on both ends. So I understood she's physically forcing me to go out into the jungle. So I went down the stairs, and as soon as I got down the stairs, I was by a tree. I just vomited this tremendous pile of, 5-gallon bucket or whatever. And it went on forever. And while it was happening, I could feel these black, these black, strings of negativity. And the memory that was associated with them, I could see pinned into the strip, the string of blackness, almost microscopic, but I could still see what it was. And then I would hear whatever was being said during this memory, kind of in fast forward as the stuff was passing through. And so when it's over, I said, "Where did you get that?" And she said, "The same place I got this," and I vomited twice as much. So that was strange because there was nothing in there, and it wasn't water. I hadn't been drinking water. It was thick and weird. It was not it was like ectoplasm from Ghostbusters or something. And so I go out into the jungle as instructed, and my intention was to find somewhere to go to the bathroom, and I shined a light on this log that had 13 different species of insect and lichens and plants growing on it and all of these creatures. And I pictured a bulldozer smashing through all this biodiversity. And it just blew my mind that anyone could do that. But then my plan had been to sit on the stick so I could go to the bathroom. But then I thought, no way am I sitting on that. And I turned around and I look, and there are bioluminescent leaves all over the floor. And I look in front of me, there's a Noya Rao tree, the tree of light, which is like, there's like 4 or 5 of them supposedly left in the jungle. And I look at the ground, and it's just moving with organisms. And so finally, I get the courage to just use the bathroom without sitting on the log. And then Pachamama says to me, just stand still now and breathe deeply. And anytime you feel a dissonance type energy like fear or regret or ego, any of this kind of stuff, take a second to let it go and make sure you're clear again. So I'm standing there doing this, and as I'm releasing all this energy, the jungle starts coming alive. And I realized that I would have a certain type of energy somewhere in my body, and exactly corresponding with that, some animal would make a sound. And as this went on and I became more and more calm and clear, the animals, birds, insects, whatever, this chorus of sounds just got closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. And I looked up, basically the point of this is the feeling of being connected to the entire net of being was absolutely extraordinary. And then it was very misty, and I looked up at the top of the Noya Rao tree, and I just put this together in this moment, that the tree of light and the sun god Inti. But I didn't know the image of Inti until a couple months ago. I finally found out what this face was. And I look up, and there's this spirit kind of spiraling down, turning slowly through the mist. And I realized it was going to land right face to face with me. And the sad part of the story here is that I was like, no, this is too much for me, and I walked away, which is one of the biggest regrets of my life, really, that I didn't wait and see what this interaction with this sun god was going to be like. And I knew that it was like Incan or Aztec or something, but it wasn't until we got to the Sacred Valley and I was in a taxi and we saw a guy with a cape on that had the face on it, and I jumped out of the taxi and I was like, what is that? And he said, it's Inti, the sun god. And that it hit me that being floating down out of the mist was this Inti. But really, the answer more concisely to the question about, the most incredible experience, the feeling of connectivity with the jungle in that moment. The other thing that I guess would be a close second or tie, maybe even, I drank with a Shipibo woman named Maestro Anita. There's an interview with her on the channel somewhere. And at one point during the ceremony, these like octopus creatures, the most brightly colored things I've ever seen. I mean, we do not have colors in this reality that are comparable to this. And so they had tentacles, and they landed all over me. There were tentacles all hanging, and I mean open eye visuals. This is not closed eye. They were in the room all over me, just landing and attaching themselves. And it kind of bothered me. I was thinking, like, is this good? What is happening right now? And when the last one attached itself, I looked up, and Maestro Juanita was right in front of me. And she starts singing this Ikaro in Shipibo that there were gestures, and her investment in the vocal performance was such that, she was blood red in the face, and, possessed has negative connotations, but you know what I mean? It was like, clearly she was in a trance state and just so completely invested in it. And because of the gestures and facial expressions, even though I don't understand Shipibo, I felt like I understood every word she was saying. And so she was having a dialogue with my shadow self, and it would make assertions, and she would like, oh, please, and like, give the reasons why that was ridiculous. And as she's doing this, these octopus things are detaching and floating away. And as she continues to the Ikaro, they're, progressively more and more of them are gone until there are none left. She stops the song, and I look up, and the sky is like crystal clear, and there are angels with hearts like floating around, and I felt internally more clean than I probably ever have in my life. And later, when I had the interview with her, I asked her, these octopus things, do you know what they are? And I've seen them before, but they had never attached themselves to me like that. And she's like, oh yeah, I called them. They're just cleaning you. And so, one of in case you didn't pick up on this, the thing that really gets me about it is that she waited to start doing the icaro until exactly the moment that the last one attached itself. And she stopped as the last one was floating away. So her assertion that she was aware of them and managing them was consistent with experience. And actually, that's not the only time I've seen something like that. There was another experience I referenced earlier where my mom had just died, and it started with these 12 spirit beings dancing around my partner and I in a circle. And they were more clear than I'd ever seen them before. And at one point, I noticed that one of them was female, and my partner looked and saw the female one, and she sat up, and the spirit looked at her and went to hug her, and I saw my partner reach back to hug this entity, and then at the last second, the entity's like, don't touch me, mortal, what are you thinking? And then I saw my partner look dejected and lay back down. So yeah, all of those things are up there. Okay, it is very late, and I am kind of sick. So are you in the jungle? Do you live in the jungle? I used to live in the jungle. I'm going back to the jungle in about a month, but a different part of the jungle in Manu. Yeah, so no, I did live in the jungle for, I think, about 5 years, maybe a little bit less. Where I worked with different Quechua shamans and Shuar mostly. And now I'm in the Sacred Valley where it's Quechua people and San Pedro. That is coca really is the primary plant medicine that people use. So yeah, in about a month we're going to Manu, and we're going to host an event there. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Please like, share, subscribe. Consider supporting us on Patreon because we're demonetized. There are options to make one-time support in the chat and in the video description. And if you're interested in attending an event, then you can email me at mountainnosis@gmail.com for the mid-November and May in the jungle. The November one is going to be here in the Sacred Valley, and we're going to incorporate hunting for morels and other wild medicinal and edible mushrooms. So thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I am going to go and drink the Tree of Light tomorrow. I'm super excited about that. It feels like a sort of graduation. Hopefully I can sleep with all the excitement. So cheers, guys. Good night.